In the quiet spaces between old traditions and modern walls, something ancient still walks among us. Welcome to Ghosts of Asia, where forgotten rituals, restless spirits, and haunted corners of the modern world whisper their truths into the night. Tonight, we invite you to listen closely, because sometimes the most terrifying hauntings don't happen in shrines or forests. They happen in places we think are safe, in the glow of city lights, in soundproof apartments, behind concrete and glass where no one believes in ghosts anymore. But what if something believed in you? This is the story of Akari, a young woman searching for peace in a quiet Tokyo apartment, and the footsteps she hears every night from the unit above. A unit that no one lives in. A spirit that never stops walking. A ritual that was never completed. And a curse that only needs one more step to begin again. This is The Neighbor Upstairs.
Akari stepped out of the elevator onto the 10th floor, dragging behind her 2 suitcases and a cardboard box full of fragile dreams. Her new apartment smelled faintly of fresh paint and something older buried beneath, a scent like dust sealed behind wallpaper. The hallway lights flickered once but didn't go out. The building was modern, clean lines, frosted glass panels, air-conditioned corridors, the kind of place where no one said hello and everything was designed to feel like a hotel, a temporary stop in a busy life, which suited her just fine. She had chosen this place because it was quiet, not peaceful, just quiet, the kind of quiet where no one asked questions, where neighbors didn't knock, where you could disappear if you needed to. And Akari needed to. Apartment 1003. Corner unit, south-facing. The rental listing had boasted of sunrise views and double-insulated walls, a perfect place for independent professionals with discerning tastes, the ad had said. The leasing agent, a nervous young man with a plastic smile, had warned her of one thing before handing over the keys. "Just don't expect much noise from your neighbors," he'd mumbled. "Most of the units are vacant. Economy, you know. People move fast these days." Akari hadn't cared. Vacant meant silence. Silence meant safety. She moved in on a Sunday. It rained as she unpacked, the kind of soft, persistent drizzle that turns Tokyo's skyline into a blur of grays and shadows. She arranged her books, hung up her nursing uniforms, placed her mother's incense burner by the window, lit it out of habit even though she hadn't prayed in years. By nightfall, the place was nearly livable. Not quite home, but clean, blank, ready to be something new. She made tea and sat cross-legged on the floor. Surrounded by boxes she had no energy to unpack. The room was still. The rain whispered outside. And then she heard it. A soft creak. From the ceiling. Not loud, not alarming, but unmistakable. Footsteps. One step, pause. Another step, creak. Another, like someone pacing, slowly, deliberately, right above her head. She froze, teacup halfway to her lips. Another step, then silence. She waited. 30 seconds, a minute, more steps. Same rhythm, same weight, same path. She stood up and looked up. The ceiling fan spun lazily. Nothing else moved. She checked the hallway. Empty. Curious now, she climbed back into the elevator and pressed 11, the top floor. The doors opened to darkness. No lights, no sounds. The hallway was colder here. The air felt still, too still. She found the door directly above hers, 1103. The lock was sealed with a strip of weathered paper, a government tag, no entry. Underneath, faded kanji read, "Property under inspection, access restricted." Dust had gathered in the corners of the doorframe, no shoes on the mat, no signs of life. She stared for a moment longer, then returned to her floor. It was probably nothing, a leftover sound from someone else, pipes maybe, building creaks. Cities weren't quiet by nature. She'd forget about it by morning. But she didn't. At 2:10 a.m., she woke up, not to a nightmare, but to the sound of footsteps again. This time, she knew they were real. Same pacing, same rhythm, same direction. 5 steps, turn. 5 steps, turn. She sat up in bed and stared at the ceiling. The footsteps continued for exactly 5 minutes, then stopped. She didn't sleep for the rest of the night. The next day, she asked the building manager, a tired woman in her 50s who smoked like every breath hurt, if anyone lived in 1103. The woman frowned. No one. Then, who's walking up there at night? Akari asked. She gave a shrug, eyes darting. Old building. Sound travels weird. Might be from the floor above. There is no floor above. Then maybe it's from next door. Next door is empty. A pause. Then she said, "Look, apartments creak. Things settle. That unit's been vacant for a while. Don't worry about it." But she said it too quickly, with that kind of practiced evasion people used when they didn't want to lie, but also didn't want to talk. That evening, Akari walked the floor again, from one end of the hallway to the other. No neighbors, no shoes by any doors, no sounds behind walls. 11 floors and maybe 4 occupied units. She might as well have moved into a tomb. She returned to her unit and turned the television on just to break the silence. But even over the static of a late-night drama, she heard them again. Pacing, right above her head. She muted the TV, listened. Step, step, turn, step, step, pause. It wasn't random. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a pattern, and patterns meant intention. She pulled out her phone and opened a voice memo app, hit record, left it on her bedside table, and lay down, eyes open, watching the shadows shift across the ceiling. She fell asleep sometime after 3. In the morning, she played the recording. At first, just static, a few rustles, the soft hum of the fridge. Then, at 2:10 a.m., the audio caught something, a slow, dragging step. Then another. Then something quieter, faint, almost beneath the footsteps. A whisper. Not words, just the cadence of a child humming, or maybe counting. She replayed the section 5 times, slowed it down. A child's voice. Ichi, ni, san, shi. Then silence. Her breath caught. She turned off the recording, stared at her phone. Her tea had gone cold. She stood up. Above her, the ceiling remained still. But Akari felt something she hadn't felt in years. Not fear yet, just the beginning of tremble of awareness that she wasn't alone. It started again the next night, exactly the same time, 2:11 a.m. Akari had tried to stay awake, not out of fear, but out of something worse, the kind of nervous curiosity that feels like standing on the edge of a rooftop, leaning forward just enough to imagine the fall. She had turned off all the lights, laid still, waited. The apartment held its breath with her. Then, the first creak, right above her bed. Step, step, turn, step, step, pause. Like the previous night, no faster, no slower. A ritual performed with metronomic precision. She stared up at the ceiling, her hands clutched tight beneath the blanket. The footsteps continued for exactly 5 minutes, always 5, always starting and ending at the same time, as if whoever or whatever was up there had no interest in being heard for long. But it wanted to be noticed. That much she was starting to understand. She bought a digital recorder the next morning, a professional one, the kind used by journalists, sensitive enough to pick up whispers, street noise, even the faint hum of electric appliances. Akari set it up by her bed that night, labeled the file Test 2, 11:03 activity. Then she waited, and again at 2:11 a.m., the pacing began. This time, she didn't just lie still. She followed the sound with her eyes, tracking the direction, measuring the rhythm. It moved in a loop directly above her, small, tight circles, almost the length of a child's stride. When it stopped at 2:16 a.m. on the dot, she hit stop on the recorder and transferred the file to her laptop. What she heard chilled her. Not the footsteps, she expected those, but beneath them, a sound she hadn't noticed the night before. A breath. Inhale, exhale, whisper soft, almost human, but not quite. She rewound, listened again. This time she wore headphones, closed her eyes, let the noise wrap around her like a cold mist. Step, step, turn, inhale, step, step, whisper, turn. Then something else, so faint she almost missed it. A low click, like fingernails tapping tile, or knuckles brushing a wall. She opened her eyes. The room felt colder. And that scent again, the one she'd smelled the day she moved in, beneath the incense and fresh paint. Old paper, dusty tatami mats, wood long since forgotten. She shut the laptop, pushed the headphones aside, got up, and checked the ceiling. There was a faint discoloration near the corner, almost invisible, but now that she noticed it, it bothered her, like moisture had once gathered there, or something heavy had rested for too long above the plaster. The next day, she visited the apartment office again. This time, the manager wasn't behind the desk. A younger man was, early 30s, clean-cut, new uniform. Polite in a way that said, "I'm temporary. I don't know anything yet." "I live in 1003, Akari said. "Do you have any updates on the unit above, 11-3? The man tilted his head. "Oh, that one. Still sealed. Inspection's been pending for a while. I think someone passed away in there." Akari's pulse quickened. "Someone died?" "I'm not supposed to say," he added quickly. "Not confirmed. Rumor. We're not allowed to discuss tenant records. Sorry." She gave a slight bow, left without another word. But her thoughts kept circling. A death above her head, a sealed room, footsteps that walked the same path night after night. She searched online that evening. Address plus jiken, incident. Apartment plus jisatsu, suicide. Her building's name in quotation marks. Nothing. No news articles, no police records. But then she found a listing, a post on an old Tokyo message board, dated 8 months earlier. "Avoid Nishi Building, room 1103. Strange sounds. Management won't answer questions. Neighbor said it was a case they're not allowed to talk about." Below it, One reply. Pacing sounds at night? I lived below it. Same thing. Always at 2 a.m. I moved out after 3 weeks. Another. It's not the room that's cursed. It's the pattern. What pattern? She kept reading.
Nothing definitive, just rumors, whispered experiences. But a few comments mentioned the same word, Kodoku, a term she hadn't heard in years. That night, she didn't sleep. She sat in the center of her room, back against the wall, eyes fixed on the ceiling. The footsteps came again, as expected, and this time she didn't flinch. She tried to count them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Turn. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Turn. Over and over. The same spacing, the same rhythm. And each time, the same chilling realization hit her. Whoever was up there wasn't walking randomly. They were trapped in a loop, a ritual, a curse, a reenactment of something final. She told herself it could be stress. Her job as a nurse wasn't easy. Night shifts, long hours. She'd seen worse things than haunted apartments. Trauma wards, overdoses, men and women at the edge of life and sanity. But this felt different. This wasn't just grief. It was something left behind, something still trying to be noticed. And the worst part wasn't that it was happening. It was that no one else seemed to care. She knocked on the door of the only other lit apartment on her floor, 1005. A man in his 50s answered, disheveled, smelled faintly of beer and incense. She introduced herself. Sorry to bother you. I live in 1003. Have you heard anything strange at night? His eyes narrowed. Above you? Yes. He looked past her for a moment, into the hallway, then stepped out and quietly closed the door behind him. Listen carefully, he said, his voice dropped to a near whisper. I've been here 12 years. That room's been sealed twice. Not once, twice. What do you mean? Different tenants, same pattern. The last girl lived there 4 months. She said the footsteps started on her first night. We thought it was the guy before her. And what happened to her? The man hesitated. She went missing. Police didn't say much. Room's been closed ever since. Akari felt a cold flush run down her arms. Whatever's up there, it wants attention. Don't give it any. He glanced down the hallway. And never knock back. What? If it knocks, don't answer. Not the door, not the wall, not the ceiling. Then he turned, slipped back into his apartment, and locked the door. That night, she sat with her recorder on again. 2:11 a.m. The footsteps began. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Turn. But something was different now. The breathing was louder, less distant, like whatever it was closer to the floor. The child's whisper was clearer this time, the counting now unmistakable. Asan, shi, go, muika. 6. The steps continued. Shichi. Hachi. 8. The pacing didn't stop at 5 minutes this time. It went longer. 6 minutes. 7. 8. And then 3 knocks. From the ceiling. Deliberate.
right above her head. She didn't move, didn't breathe, didn't blink. Her phone buzzed from the floor, a low hum. She glanced down. No messages, no alerts, just a black screen. The buzz hadn't come from the phone. She looked up and realized she could see a faint outline above, a crack in the plaster where the discoloration was, a seam, like something had once been nailed shut or was trying to push through. She didn't sleep the rest of the night. In the morning, she played the audio file back once more, slowed it down, and at the end, after the last step, after the final knock, there was a sound like breath pressed against the microphone. And then a voice, soft, childlike, but angry. Not words, not a name, just a sound, like crying with teeth.
The next morning brought no sun, just a heavy gray sky pressing down on the city like a damp cloth. Akari sat at the edge of her bed, listening to the echo of memory instead of sound. The knocking from the night before still rang in her bones. It hadn't been loud, but it had been deliberate, timed, meaningful in a way that words weren't. She didn't listen to the recording again. She didn't need to. She had memorized the sound. 3 knocks, even, calm, close. She made tea with shaking hands and left it untouched. It was hard to focus on anything else when you had to question whether the walls around you were merely walls or something more. At noon, she returned to the rental office. This time, the older building manager was there, the one with thinning hair and the cigarette always half lit between her fingers. The woman didn't look up when Akari entered. She pretended to be busy with papers that didn't matter. "I need to ask you again," Akari said, keeping her tone even, "about apartment 1103. Silence. "I've been recording the sounds. Every night at the same time, there's someone pacing above me. Last night, it knocked 3 times. Still, the woman didn't respond, just slid her drawer closed with an audible snap. Akari stepped closer. "If someone died in that apartment, I deserve to know. I live under it. I hear it every night." The woman finally looked up. Her eyes weren't angry. They were tired. "Did you answer it?" she asked quietly. "What?" "When it knocked, did you answer?" "No." "Good. That's good." Akari's voice hardened. "What the hell is going on in this building?" The manager sighed and put out her cigarette in a cracked ceramic dish. "We are not supposed to talk about it. There's a clause in the lease. You signed it." Akari frowned. "What clause?" The woman reached into the drawer and pulled out a folder, opened it, and slid a copy of the contract across the desk. Page 5, paragraph 12, buried in fine print. "Tenant agrees not to inquire into the status, history, or occupancy of any unit not actively listed for rent." Akari stared at it. "This is legal?" "Barely, but it's enough." "That's not an answer." "No," she said. "It's a warning." That evening, Akari did something she hadn't done in years. She called her mother. They hadn't spoken much since Akari left home. Things had been difficult. Her father's illness, the quiet pressure of expectation, the quiet disappointment when she chose to work night shifts instead of marry. But now, hearing a familiar voice felt like air after drowning. "I know this sounds strange," Akari said softly into the phone,
But have you ever heard of something called Kodoku? There was a pause on the other end. Then her mother whispered, "Why would you ask that?" "You know it?" "Where are you?" her mother asked. "In Tokyo." "No, exactly where?" Akari hesitated, then gave the address. A long silence followed. "I want you to move out," her mother said, "tonight." "What?" "I don't care about the money. I don't care about your lease. Get out. I'll pay whatever it takes." Akari felt cold. "Why?" Her mother exhaled shakily. "Kodoku isn't just a superstition. It was a real practice, ancient, cruel. I thought it was like poison jars, bugs eating each other." "That's just one kind," her mother interrupted. "That's what people say. But there were others, human ones. They would trap a person, alone, no food, no contact, force them into madness, into death, and then they'd bind the spirit to the place so it could never leave." Akari didn't speak. "They believed," her mother continued, "that a suffering soul could be turned into a weapon, a spirit that would follow commands, curse enemies, protect tombs. But sometimes," she trailed off. "Sometimes what?" "Sometimes it didn't stay where it was told." Akari stood on her balcony that night and looked up. The windows of 1103 were still dark, curtains drawn, not a flicker of light. But she thought, no, felt, that something was on the other side of the glass, watching, waiting, measuring her silence. That night, she didn't wait until 2 a.m. She climbed the stairs to the 11th floor, her steps silent, heart hammering. The hallway was darker than usual. One of the bulbs had gone out. She approached 1103. The seal on the door was gone. No paper, no sticker, no tape, just the number. She pressed her ear to the door. Silence, but not empty silence, held silence, like someone or something was holding its breath on the other side. She reached for the knob, half expecting it to be locked. It was cold to the touch, and it turned. Click. The door creaked open half an inch, then stopped, as if it had changed its mind. A sudden gust of wind pushed from inside, sharp and sour, like old incense and mildew. She stumbled back. The door closed itself, hard. The air in the hallway went still, and from within the walls, faint and rhythmic, step, step, turn, step, step, pause. But it wasn't overhead anymore. It was beside her, inside the walls, walking with her.
Akari did not sleep that night. Not after the door moved. Not after the cold wind hissed across her cheek like breath. Not after the footsteps began walking not above her, but beside her, inside the walls. She stayed awake with every light on, watching the corners, watching the ceiling, listening for the rhythm she now knew better than her own heartbeat. Step, step, turn, step, step, pause. It had always been overhead. Now it wandered, and it was coming closer. By sunrise, her eyes were bloodshot. Her tea remained untouched on the table, cooling like the skin beneath her fingertips. She decided not to go into work. For once, the hospital could manage without her. The city outside felt distant, all movement and hum. But her apartment had turned inward. The walls seemed heavier, the shadows longer.
The space felt smaller now, as if it was slowly folding in on itself. That afternoon, as she moved to clean the closet, she found something that hadn't been there before. Not hidden, just overlooked. In the far back of the linen cabinet, behind an old shelf lining, the plaster wall had a thin vertical seam, like a door, or the outline of one. Not a built-in feature, not a closet panel. This was older. She pushed on it gently. Nothing happened. Then she noticed something else. 5 small strips of paper glued to the wall in a vertical row along the seam, so old they had nearly faded into the color of the plaster. Each one was marked with a different kanji, but the paper itself wasn't printed. It was handwritten with ink that had bled into the fibers from age and time. She leaned in. The characters were unmistakably religious. Seals. Not decorative, functional, binding. Her breath caught. One of the seals, the third from the top, had come loose at one corner, hanging limp like torn skin. She stared at it, heart pounding. That must have been what she'd felt. The shift, the wrongness, the thing inside the walls. The seals weren't decorative at all. They were holding something in. She didn't touch it, didn't dare. But she sat back slowly, hand pressed over her mouth, feeling like she'd just discovered a lock, only to realize the key had already been turned. The room felt colder after that. Even with the window closed, a chill began to seep through the walls, not a draft, but the kind of cold that clung, that seeped into your bones, that made your joints ache without reason. She lit incense, more than usual. The same stick her mother had given her when she moved out, the one she'd only used in times of fear or mourning or unexplainable dread. The smoke curled through the air slowly, uncertainly, as if it were testing the room. That night, she placed the recorder closer to the wall seam, and she waited. 2:11 a.m. No footsteps above. Instead, a slow, dragging rustle, like someone crawling inside the wall. Something soft brushing against the plaster. She didn't move, didn't breathe. Then came the whisper. Not the child's voice this time, not counting, not breath. Just a soft, persistent hum, almost like chanting, repetitive, monotone. A string of sounds she didn't understand but recognized all the same, syllables that scraped the underside of language. She pressed her back to the opposite wall, watching the seam. The seal fluttered once, as if something behind it had exhaled. At dawn, she played back the recording. This time she wasn't alone. She had called Hirata-san, an older nurse, skeptical by nature but kind enough to come over when she only said, "Please, I need someone else to hear it." They listened in silence. Step. Rustle. Pause. Whisper. Then came the voice, low, almost below the threshold of hearing. A chant, untranslated but directed. Hirata's hand twitched on the table. "What is that?" she whispered. "I don't know," Akari said, "but it's coming from inside my wall." They looked at each other. Then Hirata-san asked something Akari hadn't expected. "Did you ever see your floor plan?" Akari blinked. "What?" "Your apartment," Hirata said. "On paper? Did you ever see the actual blueprint?" Akari shook her head. Then maybe, Hirata murmured, you don't know how many rooms you're actually living in. That thought stayed with her all day. She searched old forums, rental sites, city planning databases. There were no official blueprints of her exact unit, just a simplified version: kitchen, living space, single bedroom. But she found an archived real estate listing from 5 years ago for Unit 1003, her unit. And on that floor plan, there was a second internal room, tiny, windowless, roughly 2 meters by 2 meters, labeled only storage, sealed. She zoomed in. The room was placed exactly where her linen closet stood, where the wall seam ran, where the seals were. A room that no longer existed, except it did, hidden behind plaster, behind paper, behind silence. She sat on the floor, knees to chest, staring at the closet. And for the first time, she realized something terrifying. If her room had been sealed away, what had they left inside it? She called the temple again, the old monk. This time, he listened without interruption. When she finished, he said only, "I will come tomorrow." "Why?" she asked. "Because something is unsealing, and if the paper is failing, the spirit is waking." That night, the seal fell, not loudly, just a soft flutter. Akari found it on the floor by morning, curled and brittle. She picked it up carefully, but the paper crumbled in her hands as if it had been waiting to disintegrate, waiting to let go. Inside the wall, behind the seam, the whisper had grown louder. Not every night now, every hour. And sometimes, in the reflection of the TV screen or the shine of her microwave door, she swore she could see movement at the edge of her vision. Small, pale, child-sized, turning, watching, repeating. The monk arrived that afternoon. He did not introduce himself again, did not ask to sit. He stepped directly into the apartment, removed his shoes, and turned to the closet. "You saw the paper?" Akari nodded. "One fell." "Only one?" "For now." He took out a pouch of ash and salt, a black string with wooden beads, and a small slip of parchment with fresh ink still wet. He placed it on the seam, right where the old seal had fallen. The paper sizzled. Akari stepped back. The monk whispered something, a prayer she didn't recognize. Then he said, "This won't hold forever." "What is it?" she asked. He didn't look at her. Instead, he pressed his palm to the seam, just for a second, then pulled it back quickly as if burned. "There's a spirit inside this wall, a young one, but it's been there a long time. Bound, forced to repeat something." "A ritual?" He nodded. "An old one, from the north. Rare, illegal now. They'd trap a child in a sealed room, alone, no food, no sound. The idea was that suffering created purity. They believed that if a soul died with enough silence, it would be powerful." Akari swallowed hard. "And what does it want now?" The monk finally turned to her. "To finish." That night, she dreamed of paper walls, dozens of them. Sliding doors with nothing behind them but footsteps, soft, repeating, endless, and the sound of someone counting, not out loud, inside her head. Ichi, ni, san, shi, go, over and over, until the voice became her own, until she woke up whispering it. The next morning, 3 more seals had curled at the corners. She didn't touch them. She didn't breathe near them. But in the air, a pressure had begun to build, as if the walls themselves were now breathing, in slow, heavy intervals. And she knew, without being told, whatever was sealed behind the paper door no longer cared to stay hidden.
It began with a whisper in the hallway, not a voice, not a word, a sound, soft, wet, measured, like bare feet on linoleum. Akari opened her apartment door in the middle of the night, barefoot, with the recorder clutched tightly in one hand. The other trembled at her side. Her hallway stretched out before her, dimly lit by flickering LED bulbs and moonlight leaking in from the stairwell window. The sound had stopped, but her body knew which direction to walk. Up. The stairs creaked with age, not with weight. Her own steps were silent, but she could feel the pressure in the air changing with each floor. Thicker, heavier, like the building itself was holding its breath. She reached the 11th floor. All was still. But 1013 was open. Not fully, not swinging, just ajar, enough to break the seal of silence, enough to say, "Come in." She hesitated, then stepped forward. The door did not resist. It welcomed. Inside, it was dustless. No cobwebs, no signs of abandonment. No furniture either. Just space. And marks. She saw them first in the living room. The floorboards, though polished, bore the faintest wear, a loop of steps, a circular path worn thin by repetition. 5 steps, a sharp turn. 5 steps, another turn, a perfect spiral. She stepped over it, carefully, respectfully, trying not to disturb whatever remained in the floor's memory. Her recorder clicked on. Static. Then pacing. But not from her, from somewhere else. Not through the mic, not an echo. From behind her. She turned quickly. No one. But the floor still groaned exactly 5 steps behind her. She backed into the kitchen, breath shallow. Her eyes scanned everything, the countertops, the blank walls, the corner, where a child-sized handprint smudged the lower cabinet. She dropped the recorder. It hit the ground with a click, but did not stop recording. And on its tiny screen, the levels spiked, as if someone had spoken directly into it. She snatched it back, rewound, listened. The whisper was clear. Not Japanese, not even words, just a sound made from grief, like someone crying while chewing on a scream. She turned to leave. But her foot froze, because in the center of the main room was a piece of chalk, white, fresh, and the outline of a spiral drawn in delicate childlike circles, not faded with age, but etched recently. No one had lived here, but someone had drawn here. She followed the spiral with her eyes. It led to the far wall, to a corner behind a structural column where the light didn't fully reach. She stepped closer and saw what waited at the end of the spiral. A single straw sandal, small, worn, blackened at the heel, placed deliberately as if in offering. The air went still.
and then she heard it again. Step, step, turn, step, step. Not in the ceiling this time, not in the walls, behind her. She turned just in time to see the faint outline of a girl-shaped shadow disappear into the hallway. Akari ran, down the stairs, past the mailboxes, into the street. The air outside hit her like a slap, cold, alive, real. She didn't stop running until she reached the small temple by the main road. It was nearly 3 a.m., but the monk, the one who had visited her, was already awake, as if expecting her. "You opened the upstairs," he said, without question. "I didn't mean to," she whispered. "Did you walk the spiral?" "No." "Good." He lit incense, thick, acrid, sacred. Then he said, "Do not walk in circles in that place. That is how she binds." "She?" "The girl, the spirit, whatever is left of her. She is not malevolent by nature, but she has become a vessel of ritual. She repeats, not by choice, but by design." Akari sat on the cold floor. "She follows the steps every night." "Yes, because she died walking them. It was a purification rite, a perversion of one, done in secret. She was locked in a room with no door, told to walk until her soul became clean." "But she died." "Yes, and because the ritual was never completed, because the circle was never closed, her spirit repeats, always beginning, never ending, always walking." "Why is it spreading?" "Because you noticed her." The monk turned to face her, his eyes grave. "You hear her. You recorded her. You acknowledged her." Akari swallowed. "You stepped into her path. She thinks you are next." She returned home after sunrise. The hallway was quiet. The door to 1013 had closed again. Her recorder, still in her hand, showed its battery drained. Dead from something. Maybe time. Maybe energy. She plugged it into her laptop, hand trembling. Opened the audio file. There was a long section of silence. Then static. Then pacing. And then, very softly, not whispered, but spoken, a child's voice. "Turn when I turn." Click. "Follow the path." Click. "Don't leave me behind." Akari closed the file, and for the first time she felt tears run down her cheeks, not from fear, but from sorrow, because the voice wasn't angry, it was begging. That evening, she didn't sleep. She walked her apartment in silence, trying to think, to breathe. And only then, in the stillness, did she realize something else had changed. The spiral wasn't just upstairs anymore. It was beneath her own feet. She looked down at the scuffed marks on her floor, subtle, almost invisible in daylight, but unmistakable now. A curved path, a gentle arc, one that mirrored her own pacing over the last several days. She had been walking it, without meaning to, drawn into the rhythm, into the pattern. She turned on her heel, counted. Step, step, turn, step, step, pause. Exactly 5. She covered her mouth. The ritual wasn't only upstairs anymore. It was inside her now. She found herself moving slower in the days that followed, as if the air around her had thickened, as if the walls were pressing closer. Each step she took felt deliberate, unintentionally measured. She would catch herself pacing while brushing her teeth or waiting for water to boil. 5 steps, turn. 5 steps, turn. The same rhythm, the same echo. It had embedded itself in her body, like a melody she could no longer forget. She stopped using the recorder. She already knew what it would say. Instead, she turned to books, old ones, from a private collection in a university library across the city. Dusty tomes on rural spiritual practices, obscure rites, forgotten beliefs from the mountain villages of northern Japan. She spent the whole day flipping through yellowed pages, guided only by a single word, Kodoku. And what she found chilled her more than any whisper. Kodoku was never meant for children, at least not at first. It was originally a sorcerer's rite, designed to create powerful curses. Insects sealed in a jar, forced to devour one another until only one remained. The final creature, tainted by death, was used as a vessel for hate, poison, control. But in rare, banned cases, some sects had replaced insects with humans, the youngest, the most isolated, the most invisible. Children no one would miss. They would be placed in sealed rooms, no windows, no light, no sound, fed sparingly, spoken to only through rituals, commanded to walk a spiral path marked on the floor, over and over, until they forgot they were human, until all they remembered was the ritual, until death. Their spirits, according to the texts, became walking curses, looped consciousness bound to motion, bound to repetition, trapped in unfinished prayer. And once awakened, they searched for others to join the spiral. Akari sat in the corner of the library, hands trembling on the page. So it was true. It wasn't just folklore. She thought of the seals in her closet, the paper, the child's voice in her recordings. She thought of the spiral upstairs, the chalk, the sandal, the voice saying, "Don't leave me behind." And worst of all, she thought of herself, pacing, without meaning to, mimicking the steps, mimicking the death. That night, she poured salt along the baseboards of her apartment. Every wall, every door, every window. She didn't care how it looked. She lit every incense stick she had left. Her hallway filled with smoke. And still, at 2:11 a.m., the sound began. Not above, not beside, inside. The spiral had found its center, and it was her. She stood in the middle of the room and closed her eyes. 5 steps forward, turn. 5 steps back, turn. But this time she did it intentionally. And as she walked, she whispered, "I am not yours. I am not the next." But something whispered back, soft, right at her ear, and said, "You already are." She screamed, spun around. No one there. But the air was freezing. The salt along the baseboard was scattered, as if kicked aside. Something had moved. Something had entered. The next day, she returned to the temple. This time, she didn't wait outside. She ran straight into the main hall where the monk was preparing incense. "I read about Kodoku. I know what it is." He nodded solemnly. "Then you understand what has been done." "No, I understand what's been done to her. What I don't understand is why it's happening to me." He stared at her for a long moment, then said, "Because the curse doesn't end when the child dies." She swallowed. "It looks for the next one. The ritual requires completion. It was started long ago but never ended. The spirit has been circling, waiting, searching for someone to finish what she couldn't. Akari sank to her knees. So she wants me to die like her? He whispered. No. She wants you to join her. She wants to be seen, to be followed, to not be alone. Her curse is built on isolation, so she breaks it by creating mirrors. What happens if I keep walking? You'll forget. Not immediately, but slowly. You'll lose hours, then days. You'll begin repeating words you never meant to say. Eventually, your steps will not be your own. Akari trembled. And when the circle is complete? The monk's voice dropped lower than a whisper. Then you are the sealed one. That night she wore a string of protection beads on her wrist and taped fresh talismans to every wall. But nothing changed, because the curse wasn't on the walls anymore. It was inside her. She paced without meaning to. She spoke words she didn't understand. She woke in the middle of the room, standing without knowing how she got there. And worst of all, she smiled when she heard the footsteps, as if they were familiar, as if they were hers. On the fifth night, she dreamed of a paper door. It stood in the center of a room filled with ash. Behind it, she could hear the sound of a child pacing, small, barefoot, hollow. She walked toward it, her hand lifted, and just as she was about to slide it open, she woke, with her hand reaching toward her closet, to the sealed wall. The new talismans were burned through. She didn't remember lighting anything, didn't remember moving, didn't remember dreaming, but her feet were sore, her ankles ached, and her recorder, set to automatic, had captured the sound of her pacing for 2 full hours. And in the middle of that file, at exactly 3:03 a.m., her voice spoke, calm, empty, and said, "The spiral must complete." She never remembered saying it, but the voice was hers. The next morning she tried to leave the building. She packed a bag, grabbed her phone, locked the door, made it to the lobby, but when she reached the street, her vision blurred, her legs went numb, and when she blinked again, she was back upstairs, standing in her room, the bag on the floor, the door wide open behind her, and the faint sound of chalk scraping tile. She turned slowly and saw it, drawn onto the center of her floor, the spiral, not hers, the girl's. It had come back. She collapsed, sat on the floor, shaking, helpless. She pressed her palms together, and for the first time in years, she prayed. Not to escape, not to be saved, but for the girl. Because Akari understood now. This wasn't just a haunting, it was a mourning, and she had been chosen not as a victim, but as a witness.
Akari awoke to the scent of old ash and the sound of her own footsteps, but she hadn't been walking. She was sitting, knees pulled to her chest, back pressed against the far wall of her apartment. The lights were off. Her phone was dead. Her watch blinked 4:44 a.m., frozen, the second hand twitching like a dying insect. And in front of her, drawn on the floor in faint, curling white lines, was a spiral. Not chalk, dust. She leaned forward. The pattern was meticulous, an endless loop traced over and over until the floorboards beneath were worn smooth. The spiral began near the entrance and coiled inward toward the center of the room, where she had found herself waking more often lately. The air around her was heavy with memory, not hers, but someone else's. Someone smaller, someone forgotten. She stood slowly. The
The spiral whispered beneath her feet, even as she avoided stepping directly on it. It seemed to move without motion, like it was sinking into the apartment, fusing with the foundation. She stared at it for a long time, then made a decision. Akari went to her closet, pushed aside the clothes, and peeled back the old floor mat. Beneath it was something she hadn't seen before. Scratches. Not random, deliberate. Tiny marks carved into the wood. Circles, numbers, short vertical lines counted in groups of 5. Not decoration. Tally marks. Hundreds of them. She traced one gently with her fingertip. The wood flaked slightly, dry, old, but real. These weren't made recently. These had been there long before she moved in. Hidden beneath the mat, left by hands that had nowhere else to speak. She pulled the entire mat away, and underneath, in the center, she found a single phrase carved carefully into the floorboards. "When you walk like me, you become me." She sat back slowly. The room spun. The spiral now seemed to stretch across the entire floor, even though it hadn't moved. She knew then that her pacing hadn't just mirrored the girl's, it had invited her, welcomed her into the rhythm. And once you step into the spiral willingly, you cannot leave. She left the apartment that day, but only to visit the man in 1005, the neighbor who once told her to never answer. She knocked 3 times. He answered after a long pause, his eyes sunken with dark hollows beneath. "You're still here," he said softly. "I need to ask you something," she replied. He nodded and stepped aside. His apartment was cluttered but lived in, incense holders in every corner, prayer beads hanging from the windows, a small altar against the wall. She sat at his table while he poured tea with trembling hands. "I saw her," Akari whispered. "The girl." He didn't speak. "She's walking in me now. Every night I wake up and I've been walking." Still, he said nothing. She looked up. "You knew, didn't you, that it spreads?" His eyes welled with tears, though they never fell. "My wife," he said finally. "She heard the footsteps too, but she wasn't afraid." "She went upstairs?" He nodded. "She thought it was just a child, a lonely one. She tried to help." "What happened?" "She started walking," he said. "At first, just at night, then in her sleep, then during the day." He gripped the edge of the table. "By the end, she didn't speak anymore. She just counted, whispered numbers, scratched them into the walls. She said she was making the circle whole." Akari swallowed. "And then? One morning, I woke up and she was gone. The door to 1103 was open. Her shoes were there, but the room was empty." "Police?" "They never found her. They didn't care. Just said maybe she left. But I know." His eyes turned hollow again. "She didn't leave. She turned." Akari left in silence, but something he said echoed in her head. Making the circle whole. She returned to her apartment and unrolled the floor mat again. This time, she used her phone's flashlight. The scratch marks weren't just tallies. They were steps, mapped, a journal written into the wood. Step 1, Step 2, Step 3, turn. Step 4, Step 5, endless. And she realized the girl hadn't been walking aimlessly. She was following a sequence, a ritual made into motion. The spiral wasn't just shape. It was math, memory, trap. That night, Akari dreamed of a room with no corners, only curves. A circle of paper doors, each one marked with a seal, red ink smeared, brushstrokes shaking. The doors whispered. Her footsteps echoed. In the center of the room was a small girl, head bowed, hair covering her face. She walked in slow loops, barefoot, her soles leaving smudges and white ash. Akari tried to call out, but her mouth filled with dust. The girl turned her head slowly and whispered, "One more step." Akari awoke with blood in her mouth. She had bitten her tongue in her sleep. There was a cut on her foot, a sliver of wood. She checked the floor. More scratches had appeared, deeper, as if two sets of feet had been pacing during the night. Hers and hers. The next morning, she opened every drawer in the apartment, every cabinet, every hidden space. She wasn't looking for something to fix it. She was looking for proof that this didn't begin with her. And she found it, tucked behind the electrical panel in the kitchen. A strip of old cloth, red, stiff with age. When she unfolded it, a thin paper fell out. Faded ink, brushed symbols, ritual text, a spiral diagram, and below it, a name. The Path of Loneliness, a forbidden purification rite. Origin unknown. Number of steps, 99. Purpose, to isolate the soul for transmutation. Result, incomplete. Bound state, seeks host to finish. Akari dropped the cloth, sat on the floor, and cried, because she knew now what the girl was trying to do. Not hurt her, but to finish what had been done to her. To finally close the spiral. To finally rest. But in doing so, someone else had to take her place.
Akari hadn't touched the recorder in days. Not since the night it caught her own voice saying words she didn't remember. Not since the spiral showed up beneath her feet. Not since her dreams blurred the edges of waking. But today, she retrieved it, and she listened. Not out of curiosity, out of necessity. She needed to know where she was in the ritual. She needed to know how many steps she had taken, how close she was to finishing the girl's circle and taking her place. She loaded the last 3 nights' recordings into her laptop, opened the waveform, headphones in, volume low, and hit play. The file began with static, the usual hum of the apartment. Then, around 2:11 a.m., the pacing began. Soft, even, deliberate. She couldn't tell if it was her footsteps or the girl's. But after 1 minute, something new emerged. A voice. Faint, measured, almost mechanical. Not chanting, counting. Ichi, ni, san, shi, go, roku. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The girl's voice, low, tired, hollow. Akari closed her eyes. The voice continued. Shichi, hachi, kyu, ju, 7, 8, 9, 10. Then kept going. Juichi, juni, 11,
12. She kept walking, kept counting, step by step. The numbers passed 20, then 30, 40. The pacing never stopped. The breathing never changed. Akari's hands began to tremble. The file kept playing until the voice reached Kyuju-hachi, Kyuju-kyu, 98, 99, and then silence. No one spoke. No one turned. The footsteps halted, and in the stillness, the girl's voice, quieter now, like it was sinking, whispered, "I couldn't finish." Then another voice, distorted, overlapping, almost like Akari's own, whispered back, "But I can." Akari yanked the headphones off, heart racing, chest heaving. The room felt suddenly claustrophobic, as if the walls had moved half an inch closer. The spiral. It didn't end at 99. The girl had died before the final step, and the curse, the repetition, the loop, had been waiting all this time for someone else to walk it to completion. Someone who wouldn't stop. Someone like Akari. She loaded the oldest recording, the one from her first night, back when the footsteps were still above her. The counting had been there too, but just barely, almost beneath the sound, like a memory struggling to surface. She slowed the playback by half, filtered the lower frequencies, and there it was again. Ichi, ni, san. Just the first few numbers, over and over, like the voice was trying but couldn't go further, couldn't remember the rest, or was never allowed to. It wasn't just haunting, it was training. Each night Akari had heard more, and each night the spirit had fed her more steps, like a ritual being passed down, like a song only one person remembered and desperately wanted someone else to sing. She scrolled back to the recent file, night 4. At exactly 2:16 a.m., her own voice entered the recording, whispering softly, not numbers, but echoes, repeating the girl's count, like a duet in the dark. Akari felt cold rise from her stomach. She had already started joining the ritual, without knowing, without consent, and now it was almost done. She searched the diagram again, the one she found behind the panel. The phrase at the bottom returned to her. Number of steps, 99. Completion grants transference. Incompletion causes binding. Spiral repeats until one walks alone. It was a spiritual equation. If someone finished the ritual, the spirit would be released, but the walker would remain. The vessel must be filled. Her heart ached. The girl hadn't been haunting her out of cruelty. She had been begging for the final step, begging for someone to finish what she never could, begging to be freed, even if it meant damning someone else. Akari stared at her floor. The spiral seemed brighter now, not in light, but in presence, as if it had awakened. That night, Akari stayed perfectly still. She turned off every device. No incense, no salt, just silence. She lay in the center of the room and waited. 2:11 a.m. The pacing began. Soft, even, deliberate. She couldn't tell if it was her footsteps or the girl's. But then she opened her eyes, and there she was, the girl. Small, face pale, hair long and hanging, feet bare, walking the spiral. Exactly 5 steps, turning, walking again. And when she reached the center, She stopped, turned toward Akari, and spoke. "You know the last number." Akari couldn't speak, couldn't move. The girl stepped forward, knelt, placed a hand on Akari's wrist. It was cold, but not cruel, longing. Then she whispered, "Say it." Akari closed her eyes. The word sat on her tongue like a blade. 100. She wanted to say it, wanted to give this child rest, but she knew what it meant. It would not end the curse, only transfer it. And she wasn't ready to become the spiral. Not yet. The girl vanished before dawn. The room was quiet again, but Akari knew, not long. The spiral had been drawn, the steps had been taught. Only one number remained, and if she ever said it, if she ever walked the 99th step, it would be over, and she would begin again.
There was only one person left to ask, an old man, barely seen, who lived at the end of the 10th floor hallway, apartment 1001. He never made noise, never left deliveries outside his door. But Akari had seen the small wooden talismans nailed along the door frame, old ones, weathered by age, but clearly intentional, spiritual warding, not for show. She waited until mid-morning. The hallway was quiet, sunlight filtering through the dusty window at the far end, the kind of quiet that didn't feel safe. She knocked twice, lightly. No answer. She was about to turn away when the door creaked open. Just a sliver. A dark eye peeked out. Then the chain latch rattled and the door opened fully. He stood small and hunched, wrapped in 2 layers of shirts and a faded gray scarf despite the warmth. "You're the one from 1003, he said, not unkindly. "A nurse, yes?" Akari bowed. "Yes, Akari. I'm sorry to intrude, but I think you know about the girl upstairs." His eyes darkened, but not with fear, with resignation. He stepped aside. "Come in." The apartment smelled of cedar and incense long since burned. Clean, quiet. A small altar stood near the window, adorned with 2 photos, a man and a woman, mid-30s, smiling. One of the photos had a strip of black ribbon draped across the corner. He caught her glance. "My son," he said. "His wife." Akari hesitated. "I'm sorry, did they—" "They lived in 1103, he said simply. Akari's breath caught. He gestured for her to sit. He poured tea with steady hands, old but precise. "I begged them not to move in, tried to warn them, but they were young, practical. They didn't believe in spirits. They believed in square footage." He smiled sadly. "She was the first to hear it, the pacing, always the woman first. I don't know why. Maybe they're more sensitive, or maybe the spirit's voice is just closer to theirs." Akari didn't interrupt. "She thought it was a child, said she felt sorry for her, that she seemed lonely. My son thought it was stress, long hours, isolation. He stopped listening." He poured more tea, though neither of them drank. "One night, she disappeared. My son searched the entire building, went door to door, even broke into 1103 with a crowbar. Nothing. The room was empty, clean, no signs of struggle, no signs of her at all." Akari whispered, Did she finish the ritual? He looked at her and said nothing, because the answer was already written in his face. He stood and retrieved a small notebook from a drawer. Worn, soft leather cover. Inside were drawings, spirals, seals, diagrams of floor plans, and in the center a page with her name. Not the girl's, his daughter-in-law's. Handwritten beneath it were numbers, 1 to 99, the last one circled. After she vanished, I started researching, asking priests, hunters, temple archivists, even a man who once worked for the Metropolitan Paranormal Division before it was disbanded. Akari blinked. That's real? Was, quietly, in the 70s, before they called it superstition and buried it. He pointed to the spiral. She made it to 99. That's what they all said. But she didn't say the last step, not aloud. She fought it. Akari felt her chest tighten. And then, she whispered, she began to fade. Fade? Not physically, worse. Her voice disappeared first, then her reflection, then her name from mail, her face in photos. It was like the world began erasing her before the curse could take her fully. It's how the spiral retaliates. He leaned in. She never said the final number, but she walked it, and the curse took her anyway. Akari stared at the notebook. Her heart pounded. I've been walking, she whispered. He nodded. I dream of her. She talks to me now. She wants you to finish. I know. Don't. His voice broke. Don't join her. Akari left the apartment in silence. His door closed softly behind her, but his words echoed with every step she took. Back in her unit, she stood in the center of the spiral. The dust had deepened. The loop had darkened. Her pacing had made the wood beneath groan. She lit no incense. She wanted to know if she could resist it. She sat on the edge of the spiral and watched it like a living thing, and it watched her back. At 2:11 a.m., the footsteps began. Not in the walls, not above, inside her room. She didn't look, not at first. She closed her eyes and counted in her head. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Turn. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Turn. She opened her eyes. The girl was there, facing away, walking slowly, shoeless. Her feet left no marks, but her presence weighed the air down like gravity. Akari stood, and this time she didn't move. She didn't walk. She didn't follow. And after a long moment, the girl stopped. She turned, and for the first time, Akari saw her face. Small, empty, but weeping. Not with sorrow, with exhaustion. The kind of exhaustion that only comes from endless waiting. The girl opened her mouth, but instead of speaking, she began to hum, softly. A lullaby? No. A count, but not in words, in sound. Each tone matched a number, each breath a step. The spiral was singing now, singing its way to the end, and Akari felt it pulling her in. She clenched her fists, pressed her feet flat to the floor, and whispered, "No!"
The girl's song faltered. Her face twisted, not in anger, in confusion, like she didn't understand why Akari wouldn't help her. And Akari felt something break between them. A thread, a silence, a step that was supposed to be taken but wasn't. The girl vanished in a blink, and the spiral went still. Akari collapsed to her knees, sobbing, but not in grief, in fear, because she had resisted, but not forever. And now, the spiral knew it. It began with the hum, a low electric tremor in the air. It vibrated through her appliances, her radiator, her bones. A tone without origin, without melody, but charged with something ancient. Akari had heard it before, in dreams, in silence, behind closed doors. But this time, it came in waking hours, and it led her to the ceiling. She stood on her table, flashlight clenched between her teeth. The corner of the room where the discoloration had first appeared, a faint circle of moisture, as if the ceiling had once wept. There was a small crack in the plaster now, barely visible, but just enough to wedge her fingertips in. She scraped gently. More plaster crumbled, and then she found something folded into the space between beams, yellowed, brittle, tucked inside as if it had been hidden long ago. It wasn't a scroll, it was a photograph. She brought it down carefully, dust falling across her hair like ash, laid it on the table beneath the full glow of the overhead light. Her fingers trembled as she unfolded it. It was black and white, blurred at the edges, but the image was unmistakable. A young girl, no more than 10, hair straight, hanging over her eyes, dressed in ceremonial garments, an old-fashioned kimono patterned with spirals. She was kneeling inside a circle made of rope. A spiral of straw wound tightly around her body, starting from her feet and curling up to her chest, as if she had been tied into the shape of the ritual itself. There were talismans posted on every wall of the room, brush-painted seals that bled with haste. In the corner of the photo stood a man, blurred, half cut off by the frame. But he wore robes and a mask, ceremonial, priestly, not Shinto, older, cruder, not of blessing, of containment. On the back of the photo, faint writing in neat kanji, last attempt, failed to complete spiral. Spirit did not yield. Room sealed, 7th month, Shoda 47. Shoda 47. 1967. Over 50 years ago. Akari's stomach dropped. That meant the ritual hadn't just been passed down through accident. It had been recorded, engineered. The girl hadn't been a random ghost. She had been a sacrifice, a chosen one, a vessel. And the ritual, the pacing, the counting, the spiral, had been a death sentence from the beginning. She stared at the girl's face. It was mostly hidden by hair, but in the faint outline of her jaw, the slant of her chin, Akari saw something unmistakable. The same shape as the shadow she'd seen walking her floor, the same size, the same sorrow. It was her, the girl. This was where it began, and maybe where it could end. Akari folded the photo, tucked it into her pocket of her coat, and climbed the stairs to 1103. The door opened without resistance, no seals, no chains, just a blank, waiting space. She stepped inside, closed the door behind her. Silence. but not empty silence, held silence, as if the air had shape. She walked slowly, each step soft, reverent. The spiral had faded from the floor, but she still knew where it had been. She stood in the center, removed the photo from her coat, held it to her chest, and said softly, "I found you." The lights flickered, once, twice, then went out. Darkness enveloped her, but she didn't move. She let it settle. And in the pitch black, she heard it. A single step, then another, then the count. Ichi, ni, san. The girl's voice, not far, not from the wall, from across the room. The pacing began. Akari didn't speak, didn't interrupt. She let the girl walk. Roku, nana, hachi. 8, 9, 10. The spiral drew tighter. The air grew colder. But still, Akari waited. At 98, the footsteps faltered. The voice slowed. Kushun hachi. And then the girl stopped. Just like the photo, just like before, at the edge of the final step, trembling, incomplete, afraid. Akari stepped forward. Her foot touched the place where the rope spiral had once ended. She knelt, held out the photograph, and whispered, "You don't have to finish it." Silence. Then, the girl appeared before her, not flickering, not transparent, whole. Tears streamed down her pale cheeks. She looked down at the photo in her hand, reached out, touched it, and said, for the first time, "I don't remember my name." Akari choked back a sob. "It's okay," she whispered. "You were never supposed to be forgotten." The spiral beneath them pulsed, not with malice, but with release, like a rope finally uncoiled. And then the girl vanished, not violently, not in horror, but gently, like fog in sunlight, like breath let go. And the hum that had haunted the apartment for weeks stopped. Akari sat in the center of the room for a long time. No footsteps, no chanting, just stillness, pure, unburdened. She returned to her apartment. Her floor was clean, no spiral, no dust, no scratches. The carved tallies beneath the mat were gone. The seals had crumbled. The air felt light again. And her phone, untouched for hours, buzzed softly to life. 2:11 a.m. came and went, and nothing followed. For the first time, there was peace. For the first time in weeks, Akari slept. No pacing, no whispers, no footsteps in the walls. She lay curled beneath her blanket, with the window cracked open, the breeze cool on her face, the faint rustling of city leaves drifting in like lullabies. The silence was not tense, it was earned. She had freed the girl. She had broken the spiral. She was sure of it. And for a few days, life moved like a gentle current. She cleaned her floors, ate warm meals, returned to work. Her patients said she looked rested. One joked that she seemed lighter. She smiled and didn't correct them, because she felt it too, like something had been peeled off her back, something heavy and invisible that had clung to her without permission. The hallway outside her apartment was quiet again. The unit above remained undisturbed. Even the flickering lights no longer trembled at 2:11 a.m. She didn't speak about it to anyone. Some truths become heavier when shared. On the 6th night of peace, she dreamed. She was standing barefoot in the middle of her apartment. The floor was cold beneath her feet. She looked down, and there it was, the spiral. Drawn not in chalk, not in dust, but in light. Soft, glowing threads looping outward like a spider's web, pulsing faintly with breath. It wasn't threatening, not at first. It felt inviting, like a path left open. She stepped once, the light brightened beneath her foot. She turned, another step. The spiral welcomed her back. But when she looked behind her, there was no apartment, only darkness, and her own footsteps glowing like embers in the void. She kept walking until she reached the center, where a mirror waited. She saw her face, eyes wide, but not afraid, not anymore. Just resigned. The girl was gone, but something remained. Something familiar, something shaped like her, but not. Something shaped like Akari. And the mirror whispered, "Thank you for making room." She woke up standing in the center of the living room, exactly where the spiral had been. Her bare feet pressed to the floor, her arms hanging loosely at her sides. The clock read 2:33 a.m. She didn't remember getting up, didn't remember dreaming, but her soles ached, a deep, dull throb from repetitive motion. She looked down. No spiral, just floorboards. But a piece of her knew she had walked it again. The next day, she recorded herself while she slept. Just once, just to be sure. She didn't want to be paranoid. She wanted proof. The following morning, she reviewed the file. At exactly 2:12 a.m., the recording picked up the soft shuffle of feet. Measured, slow, but there was only one set. No spirit, no child, just her. And then at 2:27 a.m., her voice, thick with sleep, whispering, 84, 85, 86. Akari slammed her laptop shut. It hadn't ended. It had changed, evolved. The spiral had let the girl go, but not the ritual. It needed a body. It had chosen hers. She took the photo out again, the one of the girl tied in straw, her small body encircled in the ceremonial rope. Akari traced the spiral with her fingertip. This wasn't a haunting. This was a transference. She had been the vessel all along, and now the spiral wasn't walking beside her. It was walking through her. She returned to the monk at the temple. He looked up when she arrived, as if he already knew. "You finished it, didn't you?" he asked quietly. "No," she said. "I helped her let go. But now, it's me." The monk nodded. "The spiral is never destroyed," he said. "It only needs a home, someone willing, someone empathetic." I didn't agree. "You didn't have to. You stepped into the pattern. You acknowledged it. You carried it with compassion." Akari lowered her gaze. "There must be a way to stop it." "There is." Her eyes lifted. He poured her tea, then whispered, "Don't finish the walk." That night she set alarms, wrote notes, taped messages to the wall. "Don't walk. If you're standing, sit down. Do not count." She bound her feet in thick cloth, wore bells on her ankles, anything to catch herself before she stepped too far. But sleep has its own rituals, and the spiral had already nested in her subconscious. At 2:11 a.m., she arose, unwrapped her bindings, and walked. She awoke with dirt on her feet, a long hair clinging to her wrist, not hers. The window was open. The room was colder, and in the corner of her kitchen floor, one word scratched lightly into the wood: 93. Her heart thudded against her ribs. There were only 6 steps left. 6 steps before the spiral closed, before she stopped being Akari, before the ritual turned her into the next invitation. She opened every cabinet, every drawer, every corner of the apartment. There had to be something she missed, a seal, a final piece, an object the girl had left behind. She found nothing, until she looked up. The ceiling, the place she had first heard the footsteps, the place she had first noticed the crack. There, almost invisible, a faint line in the plaster. She climbed her table again, scraped gently, and behind the cracked ceiling she found a slip of paper, a final talisman, but not drawn to bind, drawn to pass. A seal not of protection, but invitation. The kanji were clear. To the one who walks with me, I leave the path open. She burned the paper, whispered a prayer she barely remembered from childhood, then sat in the center of her room, closed her eyes, and stayed awake until morning. She would not walk, not again. She would not be the next sealed girl behind the paper door. She would not count to 99, no matter how deeply the spiral lived inside her. But she also knew one truth now, heavy and sharp. The spiral was patient. It had waited 50 years for the girl to finish. It would wait again. And this time, it had already found its home.
The wind was still when Akari woke. No footsteps, no whispers. Only the faint hum of her refrigerator and the sharp, metallic tick of the wall clock, counting down another hour she didn't remember sleeping through. She sat up slowly. Her feet ached. Not from walking, from resisting. Her hands were clenched beneath the blanket, nails pressed into her palms so tightly that tiny crescents of dried blood traced her lifelines. But she was still in bed, still in control, or so she thought, until she looked at her door. It was open, not just unlocked, not just ajar, wide open. And beyond it, the hallway light flickered softly, drawing her gaze upward to 11:03. She stood. The room didn't feel like hers anymore. The air was different, thinner, as though the oxygen had been stretched too far. And something else, the spiral, was gone. No lines, no scratches, no dust trails, not even in memory. The room was clean, too clean, like a space scrubbed before surrender. She stepped into the hallway, barefoot. The tile was cool under her heels. The building was silent, not the hush of sleeping neighbors, but the emptiness of abandonment. No light seeped from beneath any door. Only one thing moved, the faintest pulse of air from above. She climbed. The staircase swallowed her footsteps. When she reached the 11th floor, she already knew what she would see.
The door to 1103 stood open, and on the floor, just inside, a spiral drawn in white ash, glowing faintly beneath the hallway light. Waiting. She did not step inside. Not yet. She stood at the threshold, heart pounding. The apartment smelled like it had before. Dust, silence, something older. But now there was a new scent beneath it. Ash, salt, and something like sandalwood, a scent often burned at funerals. On the far wall, written in fine black strokes, was a single sentence, just 5 kanji. You came farther than she did. Akari's throat tightened. This wasn't the girl's voice anymore. This was the spiral's, and it was speaking directly to her. She turned to leave, but the hallway behind her was gone. Not in shadow, in void. A blackness that rippled gently like the surface of deep water, stretching where the hallway once was. The door behind her was no longer open. It was never there at all. She was inside, and the spiral had closed the door behind her. The walls changed then, peeling slowly, paper-thin layers dissolving into the dark. She saw what had always been hidden. Underneath the wallpaper, underneath the paint, were symbols, thousands of them. Sanskrit, kanji, brushed seals of old families and forgotten schools, all layered in circles, all spiraling inward, all pointed at the center of the room, where she now stood. In the center lay a single sandal, the same one she had seen weeks ago. The other half now beside it, the pair reunited, the offering complete. Above it hung a thread of red rope, tied to the ceiling, dangling like a waiting noose. But below it, directly beneath, was something else. A bell, tiny, brass, motionless, and on its surface a single number etched with care. 99. Akari stepped back. Her body wanted to run, her mind wanted to scream, but her legs would not move. Not toward the door, not toward the hall, only forward, into the spiral. The room shifted, light dimmed, and from the center of the spiral, she rose. The girl, hair hanging, dress fluttering like paper, eyes dim and endless. But this time, she was smiling. It wasn't cruel. It wasn't kind. It was welcoming, like a child who had waited her entire life to see someone return. She lifted her hand and pointed at Akari, not with demand, with hope. Akari understood. There would be no threat, no punishment, only a choice. Walk the final steps or refuse. But either way, she was already inside, already chosen. She looked down, and the spiral began to glow. 1, 2, 3. The steps she had already walked began to light up one by one like a path paved in memory. She had walked 98. There was only one step left, and at the edge of it, the girl waited, silently, patiently. Akari breathed slowly. Her heart was calm, too calm, like she had already surrendered.
But somewhere deep inside, a voice whispered, "This is not your story." She blinked. Tears blurred the spiral. She stepped back, just once. The light faded. The girl lowered her hand. Her smile vanished. And in the silence that followed, something changed. The room shook, just once. A low tremor, a disappointed sigh through plaster and bone. Then the girl cried, softly, bitterly, without end. Akari dropped to her knees, covered her ears, and whispered through her teeth, "I'm sorry. I can't do it for you." The girl faded like smoke. The spiral dimmed. The rope unraveled from the ceiling, and the apartment door creaked open. Akari didn't remember walking home. She only remembered light, a warm breeze, and the smell of rain about to fall. Her apartment was clean, quiet, whole, but on her bed lay a slip of paper, a final note, drawn in ink not of this time. 5 words, a message from one who never finished. "If you walk, walk alone." The spiral did not return in dreams. It returned in her body. Subtle at first, involuntary, her foot tapping at exact intervals, her knees shifting in place while standing at the hospital elevator, her spine turning slightly to the left, always left, as she stood by the window. Until one night, while brushing her teeth, she realized she had paced the bathroom floor exactly 5 times. Each pass, 5 steps, turn, 5 steps, turn. Not out of thought, out of instinct. The spiral no longer needed her consent. It had written itself into her rhythm. And her reflection in the mirror paused half a second after she did. Akari lit incense in every corner. She drew salt lines across the thresholds. She scrubbed her floorboards until her hands bled, looking for any lingering trace of ash or chalk or the number 99. But the spiral didn't leave marks anymore. It left imprints, etched in her memory, embedded in her steps, humming just beneath her heartbeat. And one morning, she awoke with all her drawers open and the word "one" carved lightly into her bedroom door. The spiral had started over, and now she wasn't even walking it in sleep. She was living it, step by step, every day closer to the center. She returned to 1103. She didn't remember deciding to, didn't check the time, only found herself standing before the door. It was already open. Of course it was. The spiral didn't need to knock anymore. She stepped inside. Nothing had changed. The walls were still bare, the air still cold, the center still waiting. This time, no child appeared, only her own footsteps echoing, and her voice, faint, distant, pre-recorded in her head, counting. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, turn. She closed her eyes, let herself remember every step, every night, every breath that had brought her here. There was no more resistance, only one final act, one final choice, and no one to make it but her. She walked, not in fear,
not in surrender, in understanding. Step, step, turn. Step, step, turn. The spiral lit beneath her feet, an invisible path woven in memory. She passed the corner where the girl once stood, past the rope that had once dangled, past the line where she had always stopped. 98. She paused, not because she had to, but because this moment belonged to her. The spiral would take what it could, but it could not take her without her saying it, without her own voice completing the ritual. She stood in the center of that breathless room, heart silent, soul still, and whispered, "No." The spiral shuddered. The air bent inward. The walls cracked, not violently, but disappointedly. A low groan echoed through the foundation, like something mourning its own end. And in that instant, a shape materialized in the far corner. Not the girl, not the monk, not even Akari. A shape without form, a figure of smoke and light and repetition. The spiral made flesh. It stared at her, then stepped back, vanished, and the air exhaled. Behind her, the door was still open. This time, when she walked through it, the hallway was waiting. The lights were steady. The air was whole. And in her apartment, when she entered, there were no messages, no marks, no spiral. Only a stillness so complete it felt like it had never been broken. That night, Akari slept and dreamed of nothing. No child, no chant, no count, only silence. In the morning, she washed her floorboards again, not out of fear, out of peace. She opened every drawer, every cabinet. She played no recordings. She had nothing left to prove. She stopped the ritual, not by walking it, but by refusing to complete what was never hers to carry. The curse, she realized, was never in the spiral alone. It lived in the expectation that someone else must always finish what another could not. And now? Now the spiral had no ending. It could not pass on. It could not repeat, because she had stepped out of it. But still, she kept a note beside her bed, written in her own hand, 5 words. For nights when silence grew too heavy, for the darkness that sometimes still watched from corners, for the memory of the girl. Do not count the steps.
Time moved on. That's the thing no one warns you about after the haunting ends. It doesn't stop for healing. It doesn't wait for closure. It doesn't care what you've seen or what you've survived. The city breathed, endlessly indifferent. And eventually, the unit at the end of the 10th floor, 1003, became vacant once more. The listing was sparse. 1 bedroom, renovated floors, clean kitchen. Quiet neighbors, it promised. No mention of what had lived inside its walls. No whisper of the girl. No trace of the spiral. Because by then, Akari was gone. She didn't leave a note, didn't cancel her lease. One day, the mail stopped collecting in her box. Her co-workers assumed she had moved home. The building manager shrugged and signed the next contract. People vanish all the time in cities like this. Sometimes out of choice. Sometimes because the silence
becomes too loud to carry. The new tenant was a man in his early 30s, polite, soft-spoken, moved in with 2 suitcases and a cat. He liked the clean walls, the afternoon light, the way the hallway never echoed with noise. He noticed the paper slip behind the breaker box on the second night. It was blank, crumpled. He threw it away. For a few weeks, things were normal, until the 3rd Thursday, when he woke at 2:11 a.m. for no reason at all. The room was still, but he was standing, barefoot, facing the kitchen, 1 foot slightly ahead of the other, like he had been about to walk. He sat down, shook it off, told himself he had sleepwalked, that it was stress, that he'd get more rest tomorrow. But the next night, he woke again. Same time, same position, and this time he heard it. Step, step, turn, step, step, pause. Above. Exactly above. A slow, deliberate rhythm. Footsteps pacing across the ceiling. He blinked up, listened, tried to tell himself it was plumbing, building noise, something mechanical. But when it stopped mid-step, like someone watching. The next morning, he recorded the sound. Phone placed gently on the nightstand. App set to start at 2:10 a.m. He lay still, eyes open. The footsteps began, like clockwork. Step, step, turn, step, step. The same rhythm, the same weight. After 5 minutes, they stopped. In the morning, he played back the file. He expected creaks, pipes, building noises. But what he heard chilled him. Beneath the steps, a whisper, soft, childlike, counting. Ichi, ni, san, shi. 1, 2, 3, 4. The tenant leaned back in his chair. His cat rubbed against his leg. The window was slightly open. A breeze moved through the curtain, just enough to lift it and let a sliver of hallway light in. And from the ceiling above, the faintest sound of something brushing the wall, like small feet, turning, repositioning, waiting. He stood, almost without thinking, took 5 steps toward the door, paused, turned, took 5 more back, paused, and then, as if waking from a dream, he stopped, stared down at the floor. It was clean, untouched, but in the corner, a faint circle of dust had begun to form, right in the center of the room. And from above, step, step, turn. The spiral had no beginning, no end, only the next one, and the next one, and the next one. The unit was vacant until it wasn't, and the neighbor upstairs, still walking, always walking, waiting for someone to follow.